In summer 2013, so in summer this year, the World Energy Council, the European member states within the World Energy Council, made a questionnaire on the EU 2030 policy. This questionnaire was based on the green papers published by the EU so far regarding the possible outcome of a 2030 package by the EU on energy policy. The questionnaires were collected by the 15th of July 2013. 25 European countries responded, and there were three key messages. Firstly, the majority views a three-target system as overdetermined and prefers a system with at most two targets. Secondly, a majority prefers a greenhouse gas target, energy efficiency seen as a possible second target, and the renewables target was the least preferred within this questionnaire. Thirdly, there's a broad range for each of the possible targets, indicating that a thorough discussion of three targets, including the correlations, will become extremely time-consuming. That is, if you go for more than two targets, the discussions that will come as a consequence of this multi-target system is very cumbersome, or will become very cumbersome. The question number one to the participants within the questionnaire was: do you consider the three major targets, namely for greenhouse gas emissions, renewables and energy efficiency, as appropriate or not? The majority, 14 respondents out of 25, so these 14 respondents said no, the system is overdetermined, one or two targets are sufficient. And out of these respondents, 10 respondents mentioned the greenhouse gas as a target, 5 respondents mentioned energy efficiency as desirable for this multi-target system or for this one or two target system, and none of them mentioned the renewables as an additional target. There was even one answer that the EU should have no 2030 target at all, but this was a minority. And there was also 4 people who said yes, but the interaction between the three targets should be reflected. And 3 respondents said we should stick with a three-target system within the EU. But the general outcome is a call to the EU to reduce the complexity of the system. The comments to this question number one was is shown here on this slide. Main comment was that an impact assessment is needed, is definitely needed, to find out the competitiveness issues. Competitiveness is an increasing challenge within many European countries, also driven by the recession, of course, and so there was a strong plea to find out how the new 2030 package will affect on competitiveness of the European companies. Energy security of supply should also be one major target. The national targets for RES and energy efficiency should be considered within all these 2030 package discussions. It was also mentioned that renewable energy is only one way to fulfill the target of greenhouse gas emissions, thus indicating that the greenhouse gas emissions goal should be the major goal, not the renewable goal. At the same time, the EU should carefully look at the evolution of some policies in other regions of the world in order to not worsen its economic competitiveness. This is again the competitiveness issue that we have here. It was also stated by one participant that the renewables target can have damaging consequences, e.g. to incentivize renewables without regards to the costs. This, of course, is also closely connected to the competitiveness issues. Only one target would be sufficient, a good functioning carbon market without other extra burdens, because the other targets interact with and undermine a reasonable carbon price. So here was a strong vote for a single target system just with a greenhouse gas emission reduction. Furthermore, the current targets, as set now, are targets that are largely overlooking the considerable and important economic dimension of this package. Climate, energy and competitiveness need to be kept in balance. The last element is largely overlooked and needs to be fully incorporated in a quantitative way. An economically uncompetitive Europe will hardly become a green reference. Accordingly, the three targets cannot be considered appropriate without incorporating the economics. So the basic message of all these comments, or the main message of all these comments, is to have a good look at the competitiveness within the EU. Question number 2, what is your expectation for the most likely outcome from the 2030 climate and energy package? The main participants, or the majority of the participants, it was 10 out of 25, voted for a one-target system, 8 for a two-target system, 4 for a three-target system, 2 wanted to have 4 or more targets, and there was also 1 that would prefer no target for 2030. Mentioned as targets was for 17 times the greenhouse gas, 12 times the energy efficiency, and 10 times renewable energy. So again, greenhouse gas is here the most preferred target in contrast to the other two, to energy efficiency and to renewables. Other goals that were mentioned was affordability for the end customers, security of supply, and competitiveness. Question number 3 was, please rank the priority of the 3 goals by giving a 1 for the top priority target, a 2 for the mid priority target, and a 3 for the low priority target. And of course, one should only use 1, 2 or 3 ones in order to achieve a proper ranking. So we have here the top priority target, which is the 1, it's the lowest here, and the low priority is the 3, which is the highest column in this chart. We see that climate change is seen as the most important target, but energy efficiency is almost on a similar level. Both of them average in the middle as mid-priority target, which shows that a lot of people prefer either climate change or energy efficiency, and that they're both close to each other. Close to a low priority target is renewable energy. So the consequence for policymakers, given that these preferences make sense, is that they should concentrate on climate change and energy efficiency, and perhaps neglect the renewable energy and view the renewable energy as a corollary of any climate change policy. Question number 4 was, provided the EU will define the 3 analog targets as to the 2020 package, which targets in percentage would you consider as reasonable on the EU level and on national level? Basically, we see that the range of the answers is quite big, and this leads to the conclusion that the EU should expect extremely long discussions, given the huge spread in the answers. Hence, in order to have a quick discussion and a discussion that comes fast to results, it's perhaps better to restrict the number of the 2030 package to 1, at most 2, in order to find a quick compromise for 2030. Otherwise, lengthy negotiations will take place that will undermine the predictability that the market really needs for the 2030 goals. For the greenhouse gas emissions, for instance, we see here a wide range between -20% and -50%. The share of renewables in total energy consumption within the EU, again a wide range between 15% and 50%. National also up to 70%, for instance. Energy efficiency, there was also a big range between 20 and 40% on the EU-wide level. And interestingly enough, most of the EU targets were somewhat higher as the possible national targets. The possible targets for the greenhouse gas in the ETS and non-ETS sectors, they were somewhat closer together. So we see here a somewhat smaller range than in the general target for the whole economy, and this indicates that at least within the trading sector, a compromise for the greenhouse gas should be easier to achieve. Question number 5 was, would you consider the introduction of additional targets as sensible? The majority, 14 out of 25, said no, we would not consider it as sensible. Here's basically the fear that the complexity of the system will be too difficult. Yes, security of supply, said 9 people. Yes, competitive energy costs, was done by 7 countries. And yes, other targets was mentioned by 2. And here especially affordability is an interesting point. However, this should be an overarching goal of energy policy that should always be considered when determining the policy approach. So affordability could also be achieved by making a proper impact assessment on a 1 or 2 target system, for